So I always like to feature a book. Tonight I'm going to feature 2 books. Whenever we have a gardening talk, I always plug vertical gardening, growing up, not out, for more vegetables and flowers in much less space. Because if you're anything like me, your ambition exceeds your space, and so it's so easy to let it grow up rather than digging a whole other bed. So it's a great way to expand your space. And then another book that we have at the library is by Robert Goff and Cheryl Moore Goff. They're Montana gardeners, and this is called Guide to Rocky Mountain Vegetable Gardening. They live, I believe, in the Missoula area, and so they're pretty knowledgeable about high altitude gardening as well, if you just want a book to thumb through. So thank you again for joining me tonight for High Altitude Gardening, Sunny Season Gardening with Manon Gaudreau and Amy Mattias of 5B Resilience Gardens. I am delighted to introduce them both. They're wonderful gardeners. Manon Gaudreau started gardening in 2005 when her daughter asked her a question about gardening, but Manon did not know the answer. She's been looking for answers and sharing them with our community ever since. After studying seed saving with local gardener and nationally recognized seed saver Bill McDorman, Manon became a master gardener and helped establish Valley Victory Gardens. She is the director of the Wood River Seed Library, one of which is housed in an old card catalog at the Haley Library. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And she has taught classes in gardening locally for many years. Amy Mattias is the program director for the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience, and in that role helped launch the 5B Resilience Gardens collaboration in 2020. She serves on the Blaine County Food Council and is a board member of Idaho Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Amy follows regenerative practices rooted in traditional ecological knowledge in her own garden and recently received a permaculture design certification from the Permaculture Institute of North America. She has worked within the local food movement for over 10 years and is committed to sharing her knowledge and passion for growing food with the community. So please join me in welcoming both Amy and Manon.
Try my best. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We are delighted to do our 3rd in our 3-part series of gardening this spring. As Kristen mentioned, this is Sunny Season Gardening. I wanted to quickly talk about what 5B Resilience Garden is. Manon and I and a group of other people got together in 2020 right after COVID hit, and we saw a big interest in gardening and people wanting to source seeds, get more familiar with where their food came from, how to grow their own food, how to preserve food, how to cook from scratch. So we launched this initiative to bring awareness to gardening, help connect gardeners in the community, provide more resources, and allow people to have successful experience gardening in our high altitude climate. We have 3 guiding principles: food production, soil health, and pollinator habitat. Last year, Kristen hosted us on, we dove deep into those 3 guiding principles. So if you want to learn more about any of those, you can find those recordings on the Haley Public Library website. And we also have a lot of resources on our website, 5bresiliencegardens.org. Today we will cover warm season gardening, how to prep your growing space for gardening, how to create microclimates, and then we have some fun plant charts that go through a lot of different types of warm season plants, both vegetables, herbs, and flowers. We didn't cover them all. And also just a caveat, Manon and I like to have conversations, so interrupt us at any time with questions. If there's plants that you're struggling with or want to learn more about, we can dive in deep about those conversations like we did about garlic. Okay, warm season gardening. Manon, tell us what it is.
So warm season gardening is the vegetables that some of them actually came from the equator, or where the weather is warm, right? And they were brought over, but we can only grow them in the warm season, which is above 65 degrees. And most of these plants don't like cool nights, but here in our area we have very cool nights. So even these warm season vegetables that we are able to grow here, they need more protection than if you're gardening south of Idaho, because we're at high altitude, our nights are very cold. And our season is very short. Technically speaking, we have 60 days, some years 90 days of
some
warm
years 0 days.
We could have a frost any night of the summer, really. So it's a challenge in our high altitude climate to grow the warm season vegetables, but it's doable, and we have to apply some wisdom and knowledge and loving care to do that. The plants need between 6 and 8 hours of sunlight during the daytime, and most of them like full sun exposure. And when you want to maximize your sun exposure, you will do if you're doing it in rows, you would do your rows east-west so that they get sunshine on both sides, from the east and from both sides. But sometimes our sun can be scorching, too hot during the daytime, and sometimes you have to shade these things, especially from the west sunshine, the evening sun. And we can achieve the growing in containers so that you can bring your containers indoors when it gets too cold. And or you can use greenhouses or other structures like cold frames or hoop houses, different structures we can use to keep the warmth close to the ground, especially where the feet of the plants are. They need their feet to be warm, and we'll explain in a moment how to do that. So the plants that we can grow here, many people grow them really well. The tomatoes, peppers, beans, corn, tomatillos also, which is the same as tomato family, melons, cucumbers, squashes, winter squashes, and summer squashes, eggplants, basil, and many flowers grow really well here. However, we need to create the ideal growing conditions for these plants to grow. Because we have a short season and the nights are so cold, we have to make sure that we have a really good soil, a really good fertile, loose soil, and with lots of compost in the soil. So a nice, rich soil with a healthy microbiome, and healthy plants, and plants that do well in our climate. So at the Wood River Seed Library, we grow plants here. We collect the seeds from them, so these seeds are adapted or adapting to our climate because they're grown here. If the plant successfully grows and produces seeds, it's adapting to our climate. And you probably want to grow varieties that will have a shorter maturity time rather than the ones that take more time. Like some tomatoes take 120 days. Well, you probably don't want those here. Our season is short. So take the ones that have a shorter season. You may want, like tomatoes, you may want the cherry tomatoes rather than the large tomatoes because they do better. Although some people can grow the large tomatoes also if you create the right climate. Also, you would want to grow bush plants for beans and tomatoes. You can have the ones that grow closer to the ground. They'll stay warmer than the climbers. And this book that Kristen showed that says you can grow vertically. Well, you have to know that if you're growing vertically, you need some protection. If you're growing closer to the ground, your plants will stay warmer because they're closer to the ground. The ground accumulates the heat. Did you want to add something on that? You're already on the other slide. I was still on the previous slide.
Oh, okay, skipped ahead. Okay. I think a couple things just to mention. neither Manon and I really use these methods that often, but gardeners that use them in the community have a lot of success using like black plastic or some type of plastic to cover rows to keep the soil warmer. So that's one way of increasing that soil temperature. I tend to not use a lot of plastic, so that's not a method that I like to use. Yeah, question in the back. Exactly.
The black plastic is mostly to cover the ground itself. So you would kind of mulch the ground. You prepare your soil, you put your drip pipes if you have a drip system, and you put your plastic directly on the soil as tight as you can on the soil.
So there would definitely be heating.
I have to be here. I'm sorry, Kristen. I have to be here to show my plastic bag.
And repeat the question.
Can we hear the question?
The question is, when you put the black plastic, does it heat up the soil too much, right? And cook the soil? The plastic leaching? Okay. It's not ideal, and that's probably why we don't use it that much, but I use it some. And you can use, this is just a black plastic bag, which I often use rather than buying agricultural plastic film, but there is something called the agricultural plastic film, which reflects the infrared light, which is really good for the plants. And they leak less than this probably, but they probably still leach a little. Yeah, it's not the ideal solution, but it allows us to cover the ground, retain the moisture, warm up the ground, prevent the weeds from growing.
So you would suggest using that at this time of year?
I use it especially when I do the Three Sisters system, where you have a tall plant like either corn or sunflower in the center, and then beans around it, and then squashes around. And I use this to retain the moisture and to make sure the soil is warm.
I don't use it at all. I use lots of ground cover because healthy microbes in the soil and ground cover and organic matter in the soil buffers temperatures. So it keeps it from getting too cold, but also from getting too hot. So I actually let a lot more quote unquote weeds grow in the area to protect the ground. I also use mulch techniques. The issue with mulch in the early season or in a cool season like we're having this year is that mulch can actually shade the ground so it won't warm up as quickly. So when I'm getting ready to plant my tomatoes in a few weeks, I will move mulch around for a couple days so that the soil is exposed to the sunlight to get some warmth. And you can also, instead of black plastic, you can use a fabric, like a black or dark fabric, and that can kind of reduce some of the concerns with leaching of plastics, but still get the heat and the ground cover that you're looking for with fabrics. And yeah.
Last year's leaves.
The question is, can you use last year's leaves? We're repeating the question so our audience can hear it, and Kristen always reminds us to do that, so thank you, Kristen. I definitely use last year's leaves as mulch. They're better when you can chop them up a little bit, because then they'll break down a little bit faster. There can be concerns about diseases and pests living in the leaves that could cause issues. Certain leaves will harbor aphids and things like that that you might not want. There's also some leaves, probably not really many that we have around here, can have like saponins or tannins in them that can reduce some of the microbial life in the soil. You want to talk about your use of weeds or your use of leaves?
Leaves? Yeah, I do use leaves as a mulch in the fall, and sometimes I remove them in the spring. I only keep what I need. And I'm selective about the kind of leaves I use. I prefer the leaves that kind of curl up when they dry up, as opposed to the waxy leaves from the aspens. They they just stay flat and they cake. And they actually cake too much in the spring, and they don't allow your sprouts to come through. So I'm selective about them, or at some point I might remove some in the spring. Like I cover my garlic, for example, with dead leaves, lots of dead leaves and branches on top so the leaves don't fly away. But I remove them in the spring so the garlic can freely sprout. But I do use leaves or grasses. If you have grass and the grass is being cut, you can use the grass cuttings as something that you would apply as a mulch, and you may have to do that several times during the summer.
Any other questions about ground cover mulching?
I was just thinking when we're talking about plastic, that, in a lot of the gardening catalogs, they're advertising red plastic. They usually show it for their tomatoes or something. And I don't know, is that a gimmick? Probably, yeah.
We're going to repeat the question first.
Okay.
The question is, the red plastic that you see in gardening catalogs under tomatoes, is that a gimmick?
The red plastic actually reflects the infrared light onto the tomatoes, but after a few years they found out that the black film, now they make it black and it still reflects the infrared. So some people prefer the black one now to the red one.
People want to sell us all sorts of things,
So
right?
prepping the soil, you want me to go ahead with that? So
Sure.
we need to make sure that the soil is warm, and the way to find out is to use a soil thermometer. So you dip your soil thermometer probably about 4 inches or wherever you think the roots of your plants will be. And that has to be 65 degrees. And also the surrounding air has to be kind of warm too. But most important is the feet of the plant will be warm.
And if it's not?
Don't plant your tomatoes.
Well, don't plant.
Or anything that's warm season.
Don't plant yet, or create a microclimate, and we'll tell you how to create a microclimate.
And there's some seeds, like a lot of cucumbers will not even germinate in soil under 65 degrees. Peppers like 80 degree soil to germinate. So some of your seed packets can tell you that. If you're interested in like, when do I seed peppers, you can research that for soil temp. So a lot of people, when you're starting seeds indoors for your warm season crops, you might do a heat mat underneath them. That's to warm that soil up for germination. So like, I don't think any of our soils are anywhere close to 65 degrees right now. It's probably close to 50 or so. So we're still at least a few weeks out before we can plant anything.
Typically like a medium between the high of the day and the nighttime temperature of your soil?
The 65 degrees?
The question is, whether is the soil of your temperature connected to like the high and low temperatures that we see throughout the day? That's a good question.
That's a good question. I would say the average temperature of the day.
It wouldn't be the high because the nighttime would bring it down.
Right.
So I think it would be
Yeah, it would be what you would feel in the middle of the day. Or
I would want to test that, because soil is thermal mass, right? So there's a lot of surface area there, and it can warm up, where air is air, and that moves around all the time, where soil is not as thermal mass like as water. It's not as dense as water, but there is density to soil. So like, your soil will stay warmer overnight than your low temp. I think that's like a fun experiment that we should do, though, is do some soil temping and
mulch, I'm sure, on the top.
yeah. And again, your soil health also dictates a little bit about your soil temperature. Like living roots in the ground, like if you were to cover crop and leave living roots in your ground, those, like the microbes in the soil, they're letting off heat as well. So if they have food to eat through crops or compost or sugars of any type, they're going to be putting off heat to create more warmth, versus if your soil has no compost and no living roots and no microbiome activity at all, it's going to be a lot colder. But I think you're onto some fun experimentation that we can do to get a better solid answer on that, because I think that's a really good question.
And I was thinking about the seedlings. Starting seeds indoors is very important here, that we start our seeds indoors so that we lengthen our season. Because if the tomato maturity time is 100 days, well, you can spend 30 days or more of that indoors, and that helps. That really helps. And this year it's a very cool spring, so I might even start my beans indoors. I might start all my squashes indoors this year, which I do sometimes. And I'll tell you later how I do it. Even though they say, well, it's better if they're started in the ground, but if I wait to start them in the ground, I might not have beans this year because this season might be really short this year. So sometimes you have to try the impossible. And I have successfully started beans and squashes indoors and transplanted, but I'll tell you how to do it later.
So on that note, with starts that you've started inside, how do you determine when to put them outside, other than like temperature? I mean, we have like a covered greenhouse, kind of this, the type with just the plastic on the outside. But our tomatoes, after starting them in March, are like only this tall, and I'm not sure if they're big enough to go outside. Like, how do you...
Yeah, so the question is, when you have seed starts going for warm season plants, when do you know to plant them out into your garden, whether it's in a greenhouse or not? Temperature is definitely key. My tomato plants are in the same boat, like very small. I like to at least get 2 sets of true leaves on them before I would plant them out. I think what you're experiencing is just a cool spring, so they're not getting a lot of growth. I know for me, like we had almost a week of no sunshine at all, and they were so sad. And they're starting to kind of bounce out of it. They're getting a little happier now, but I'm still at least probably 3 weeks. I'll probably wait until at least the first weekend in June, maybe longer. I'll be watching that weather. And that's the thing about gardening in this area. Like, you are looking at the weather all the time.
So basically it's not about the size of
No.
and maturity of
As long as you have 2 sets of true leaves, not just the first leaf, but the 2 sets of full leaves.
Right.
They've been this big for like 2 months too.
Yeah, and they'll get bigger as we get warmer temperature. Also think about your water when you're watering it. If you can water with warmer water, like I like to fill a watering can and put it out in the sun and use that, versus if you're using hose water, that's going to be colder, so that's going to cool your soil off. So you can think about a little bit of that. You might also at a certain point need to add some nutrients to it. Because they're going to be in a pot longer, you might want to add some fish emulsion or some compost or something to give them a little boost before they can get out into the soil.
But the plants don't grow, at a steady rate.
Right.
They'll sprout, and then they'll grow leaves. And then they'll grow taller, and they'll grow more roots. They'll grow roots. So sometimes it feels like they're not doing anything, but they're making roots.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Although if they're in a very cold environment and they stay small too long, we say they can get stunted, where they'll never get as healthy. But it's the plants you have, plant them, and they'll produce anyway. And one thing to know about gardening here is you cannot expect the same yield from your plant as if you were planting in Twin Falls or a warmer region, or if you were in California or Texas. Here we typically get maybe 50% of the yield of the same plant that would be in a warm climate. But we still get a lot of vegetables, so it's still
And we
worth
don't
doing.
have to deal with some of the diseases and bugs that they deal with, because we don't really have a lot of issues with mildew because it's just not humid enough here. We don't have as many pests as you will have in a longer growing season. One last thing I want to say about weather, because I think it's important to watch weather apps or listen to the news or radio. We have a lot of microclimates in our community, so having your own weather station at your home, or temperature or thermometers that you're checking in your growing area area is really helpful, because I've seen days where the weather app tells me, oh, it'll only get down to 35, and I wake up in the morning and it got down to 29 at my house, or vice versa, right? It might say, oh, it's going to get down to 28, and I wake up and it was like, oh, it was only 34. I could have left my seed starts out in my greenhouse that night. So I definitely recommend individualized weather stations or thermometers that you're checking in your own area, because our weather, we're in a mountain community. It just isn't, wherever those weather stations are is not your home.
Other questions? So the other thing I have, which is it there yet, the hardening, or is that the next slide?
I think it's the next one. We want to talk about protecting plants. We kind of have a little bit. No, hardening off it's our second bullet point.
Okay.
We can talk
so
about
hardening off, this is when you grow your seedlings indoors, you want to bring them outside progressively so they can acclimate to the weather, because they're inside, they're kind of protected, they have no wind. It's, kind of a constant environment. And when you bring them out, it's windy, it's colder, it's warmer, it's drier, or it's wetter. So you take them out maybe half an hour or 1 hour the first time, and then you can lengthen the time you put them out. But the first day, you don't let them out too long, and you check on them. You don't want to let them dry up completely, because they'll die.
Yeah, you might want to put them in the shade instead of going in full sun if they've been in your home versus a greenhouse. So they can be very temperamental.
And
the
also,
little tiny baby plants that need your protection if you've been growing them with a lot of protection.
And also beware of overwatering, which is very damageable to the plant. It can create mold right at the soil level, and then your little plant will go like this, and you'll wonder why you were so nice and suddenly you're down on the ground, and you'll see that it got moldy, it rot right on the surface of the ground because it was too wet. So you have to make sure to let the surface of your soil dry a bit before watering again, after they've sprouted. Before they sprout, you want to keep some humidity, not wet, but humid. But after your seedling has sprouted and you have the two little leaves, water a little less so that it's don't create the dampening off problem.
Yes.
And the covers. So we have to cover our plants to protect from frost, to protect from hail. It might snow, like last week. My daffodil
snow and hail
got
all on the same day.
Snow on them. And the wind can be very cooling, very cold, or it can be very drying. So once you have your plants out, and if your weather is too cold or too dry, you may want to cover them with something. And I have agricultural fabric over there. You can cover with a fabric that you have, or you can buy agricultural fabric, which is very light, and it lets water through, it lets air through, and sunlight through, but not. It creates a barrier so that the humidity from the soil doesn't evaporate so much, and it protects from the hail and from the snow and the wind that is too cold. So we cover, some plants can be covered all the time, but some plants need to be uncovered because they need pollination. And the pollinator can't get to the plants if they're covered all the time. And the pollinators usually come early in the morning, so if your plants are in flower and they need pollination, you have to give them a period of opening up so that the pollinators can come. However, covering your plants helps to protect your plants from bugs, especially the little butterflies that come around and they want to lay their eggs. If there's a cover on top of your plants, it protects your plants. So the cover can be directly set on the plant. You can, unless your fabric is too heavy, or you can have little hoops and put the cover on top of hoops. Or you can have, if you have a big hoop house with, big hoops that you can actually walk into this structure. But usually at home, we don't have the space or we don't do that necessarily, but we can have low hoops or spread the fabric directly on the plants.
And I'll just add that get creative. Use what you have at your home. If you don't have a hoop house or a greenhouse or the space, you can use all sorts of things. Like Manon has some milk jugs and plastic mechanisms over here that you can use. This is this picture on what it would be all of your lower right. This is my garden last year on June 25th when it got down to 24 degrees. So it's all arugula, doing fine. Everything's good. These are little tender cucumbers under here. So I didn't really have hoops or anything set up. This is my first year gardening in this location. So I had all these bins that I moved with, and I just put the bins on, and then I loaded them with rocks to weigh them down, and all of my plants survived despite it getting down to 24 degrees. They would have all been killed if I didn't do that. And they might have actually been killed with just fabric because it got so cold. And of course, the weather station told us it was only going to get to 30 degrees. But I was so glad when I woke up in the morning and did that because, yeah, not fun.
So this is a form of a cloche. Some are actually fully transparent, but this one is, it's semi-transparent. But it's a plastic thing, and it has a top that you can fold, close, or leave it open. So that's a really nice thing to have on your baby plants to have individual protection. Or, as Amy said, you can use a jug, and you cut the bottom part off of the jug, and you just use the jug itself as a cloche. And you can either have the lid on or off depending on how cold it's going to be. I also use, this is the agricultural fabric. So it's very thin, and that's a very old piece, and it's got holes in it, but I just wanted to show you it's very fluffy.
You can get it at local garden centers here.
And you can buy it by the yard at some centers, or other places you can buy it in a package, so many yards in the package. And if it's going to be a light frost, this is really nice. Each layer that you put it gives you about 4 degrees of protection. But if it's going to be a bigger frost than the plant would like, and some plants don't actually want to go below 40 degrees, so it doesn't have to be a frost to damage the plant. The squashes don't like it colder than 40 degrees. So I might put the fabric, the light fabric, and then I might put a sheet of plastic on top, or this kind of bubble wrap. I collect all kinds of bubble wrap that this probably had fish in it when I received it, so I use all these things to cover my plants to insulate them as much as I can if there's going to be a big frost, and sometimes it's just one night or two, and then after that you can remove everything.
How do you keep that on the plants? Like, if it gets windy? I mean, I
Yeah.
tack it down, but
I use clothespins, like to put on a clothesline. That's what I do. I use the wooden ones. I have a stack of them in my garden area, and that's what I use to hold down my fabric. And if I have little hoops, which I make myself with branches, I just pin it to the branch itself. Or if you have a large piece of fabric, you can weigh the fabric with stones all around. But yeah, you have to find a way to stabilize the fabric because the wind will lift it. Yeah, I use clothespins and stones to hold it down myself.
I would just to add to that, I would recommend like adding more fabric than what you need so that you can secure it in place, versus I always try to like use as little as possible, and then all of a sudden like the end is flapping away. So give yourself enough space to, like, if you have a raised bed, to put it over the raised bed and tie it down or something. We have a question in the back. Yeah? No? Okay.
Another way to protect, and this was made especially for tomatoes, it's called a wall of water, and it's like a plastic cylinder, but it's a double cylinder, and it's got little tubes. So you fill each little tube all around with water, and the water has a heat mass plus the plastic protects from the wind. And sometimes I'll cover over that if it gets too cold.
Great. What else do we want to talk about with making microclimates? Because we talked about a lot of this on this slide previously.
I covered everything from my notes.
Great. Okay. Your thermal mass, I think, is just, we talked about it a lot. Water has thermal mass, soil has thermal mass, rocks have thermal mass. If you have a greenhouse that is sealed off from the outside area, but it's still getting cold, you can heat up jugs of water or barrels of water in there, and that will hold heat. Yeah, milk jugs filled with water, glass jars, like glass has thermal mass, so you could do glass jugs of water in there. There's all sorts of ways to think about using what you have in your home and creating thermal mass captures by doing that. You may have seen greenhouses that actually have like ponds in them or big barrels of water or open tubs of water. That helps with humidity, but it also helps with storing thermal mass within the infrastructure itself to let off heat. So if that's something that you want to do. And then I just wanted to, we briefly mentioned container gardening earlier. I was talking to a farmer and was complaining about like, oh, am I going to plant out my tomatoes this year? It's so cold. And they said, well, have you heard of a tomato wagon? And I said, no, what is a tomato wagon? And they have friends who live up in, I think the Stanley area. So they're like, we're never planting tomatoes out in Stanley. And they have a big wagon, like a toy wagon, and they put pots in that with irrigation set up, and they wheel it out of their garage every day and wheel it back into their garage every night. And I was like, that is nifty. So I think just getting creative when we live in a climate like ours is really important. If you have a south-facing wall that has that, maybe it's a stucco wall or rock wall or something, you can put your pots right up against that, and that will keep them sheltered and warmer overnight. You use a wheelbarrow, exactly. A wheelbarrow makes a nice tomato wagon, I'm sure. All sorts of different things. You could even have a little dolly cart that you use. If you didn't have any of that, but you had some type of, like a dolly itself, you could just pull in your pot every single night if you wanted to. Manon is going to tell us about growing in a 5-gallon bucket. Strong people could lift that filled with soil and move it in with a tomato cage in there.
Especially if it's potting soil, which is lighter than garden soil. But you can grow a plant in here, and then you have a handle to carry your bucket if you want to carry it in and out. And a bucket like this, you can grow a tomato plant in.
Any questions?
So I want to stress again that if you water with warm water, it will warm up your soil, especially if we're going to get very cold weather or snow or something. Water with warm water, so water with tap water from inside the house, or collect rainwater and let the sunshine warm it up, or if you're using tap water, fill bucket. You could fill buckets like that, and or watering cans, but let the chlorine evaporate before you water your plants with it. But it's very important to use warm water if you want to warm up your soil for your warm season plants.
And just to play off of that, cold water cools down your soil. So when it's 100 degrees in August and your plants are flagging because it's so hot, cool water will help them, which is probably what most of the watering that you're using is from irrigation anyways. But that can always be a trick if you need to cool stuff down. Just cool water. Give it a little ice water bath if you need to. Ready for plant charts? Oh, we have all these pretty photos that I just threw in there for fun of warm season plants that you can grow here in the community.
So on the
This one?
This one here, which is the left bottom corner, it's the 3 sisters that I like to grow every year at the Grange Community Garden. And I have sunflowers in the center, and then I plant beans around that, and the beans climb on the sunflower itself. And then I plant 5 squashes all around. And they could be summer squash, winter squash. They could be melons, zucchinis, cucumbers, and any of that family. And the nice thing about the squashes is that the leaves are kind of rough and prickly, and the animals cannot get to the tender beans in the center. So it's and also there's companionship. The plants help each other. The big leaves of the squashes help to keep the bottom of the plants warm and cool. You know, it kind of dampers the temperature, buffers the temperature. And also there's an exchange of nutrients that goes on in the ground, which is really great.
So believe it or not, this is also a 4 sisters planting. This is in my garden a few years ago. It's a little bit more wild than Manon's. It's hard. The corn and the buckwheat did really well. So this is actually, I think that's a bean leaf. That's a squash leaf down here. On the other side, the squash were more visible, but this is also a 3 sisters type of planting with corn instead of sunflowers. And then I love buckwheat because it pulls nutrients up and is very pollinator friendly. So I have a lot of buckwheat growing in my yard, but like you can see the corn are tasseling off. And this was a corn that matured in less than 70 days. So not a sweet corn. It was a popping corn variety that was fun to grow. Sunflowers, they're so beautiful. We have native ones here, but you can also buy other seeds or get seeds from the library of different colors and sizes. I think Manon is growing mammoth sunflowers on her 3 sisters. So the really big, beautiful heads that all the birds love. They're great bird seed. Let's see what other, a squash. This is a lovely squash plant. You can see the little tiny baby squash forming. The fun thing about squash, like if you love stuffed squash blossoms, the ones that are good for stuffing are the male flowers. So then you can harvest those, and then your female flowers are pollinated and will grow the fruit. So you can have both off of your plant, which is really fun. This is an eggplant. I don't really like eggplant, so I don't really grow it very much, but it is a warm season crop. And this is my garden last year, and tomatoes, and you can see basil here. I also had nasturtiums and marigolds interplanted with those tomatoes. And I will just, as we go on to the next slide. Oh, you want to add more?
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing, that there is great benefit to have a density of plants, to have intensive gardening and have a lot of plants together, because they protect each other. If there's a wind, they keep each other warm. If it's too warm, they shade each other. And so there's great benefit to growing a density of plants in the garden, rather than spacing them out too much. And at the beginning, I distributed some calendula seeds. Calendula add to the density in your garden. You can plant them everywhere among other vegetables, and they also attract pollinators.
And they're very medicinal.
And they're medicinal also. You can eat them. You can eat the
You make
flowers.
tea, you can make salve out of them, infuse them in oils for different body care products. They're lovely. A lovely plant. Very good for the digestive system and wound healing.
And if you do a search on companion planting, there are plants that grow well together. There are plants that don't grow well together. So if you look at companion planting, which we don't have the details here, but that's a very beneficial thing to do, especially in our climate.
So these are our, we've created some charts. So Kristen will follow up with this to everyone who signed up today with the slides, so you'll get these charts. So we're not going to go line by line, but we will talk about any of the plants that you see on here with details. So the way that these charts are organized is obviously the common plant name, and then we have whether it prefers to be transplanted or direct seeded, and then if it prefers protection or not, and then we have when you could plant them, whether it's direct seeded or transplanted and then planting out. And then also some notes about things to look for or why these are so great or varieties that people really like. And Manon mentioned a lot of these things earlier in the presentation, but always, if you're shopping for seeds or plants, try to find varieties that mature in less than 90 days. That's how you'll get success there.
Or seeds that were harvested locally because they're adapting to our climate.
And on the next slide, I am plugging this, but I will say it now as we're talking about this. Squash Blossom Farm is one of our local amazing farmers, and they do a plant sale every year. And all the plants that they sell in their plant sale are plants that they will grow on their farm because they produce well. So their plant sale is currently online. You can order from them and pick up. There's a handful of different pickup times. I think anyone who buys Squash Blossom plant starts has like an amazing gardening season. So if you don't like growing from seed, or you want to add some more plants that you didn't start from seed, or if you're new to gardening, that's a great way to start. And then you can actually save your seeds from the plants from Squash Blossom, and that will make them even stronger in years to come.
And we will also have a plant exchange and seed exchange on May 28th. I know it's on another slide, but we'll have four farmers selling plant starts, plus other gardeners having their plant starts to exchange. So May 28th at the Grange is a great time to get some starts from that were, most of them were started with seeds that were adapted to our climate.
Mm-hmm. And then one last thing on here under growing tips that I just wanted to mention is like a lot of people, when you grow tomatoes, we're getting close to September and they have all these green tomatoes on their plant, right? And you're like, how do you get these to ripen up? Or how do I get them to stop putting off new flowers and creating new fruit and ripen the ones on the plant? And you can prune them. You can like actually clip off all the flowers that are coming so that the energy stops to focus. The thing I like to do is like reduce watering to it, because that essentially starts to kill off the plant and it makes it ripen. And you can use that trick for a lot of different plants. If you're like, oh, I need everything to ripen and stop growing more, you want to trick it into thinking that the season's over a little bit earlier. You can harvest green tomatoes and they will ripen up. Some people even take the whole plant and hang it upside down in their garage and they'll ripen up. But I think reducing watering is always a really good trick to get things to further on.
Another way is to, if you're in the fall and you know it's the last stretch for your tomato plants, you can remove the trellises, let the plants lay on the ground, get closer to the ground, because the ground is warmer and will let off heat, and then you cover them with a cloth and maybe a plastic on top and maybe something else on top if there's going to be a big frost, and tomatoes will continue to ripen that way.
Anyone have any questions about the plants on these charts? Yeah.
I have a question about the plants that are not on the chart.
Okay.
A lot of them are missing. So are you saying now it's too late to plant those that are missing?
Absolutely not.
So the question is it too late to plant things that are not on the chart?
Correct.
And so do you have an example of plants that are not there? Lettuces? Lettuces are...
Root crops.
So a lot of lettuce, carrots, and root crops are cooler season crops, so they do well in colder. So our previous talk was all about cool season gardening. We are still in cool season gardening season. So you can plant all of those. A lot of those you can plant throughout the summer. They might want a little bit more shade. That's where you can think about interesting companion planting. Like if you have a bunch of tomatoes, you can plant lettuce underneath the tomatoes, and then they're kind of shaded out by the tomatoes and you can still harvest them. So yes, this is specifically for warm season plants and specifically for popular plants, like common plants that are grown. We also have another chart that's herbs and flowers that we'll get to. But yes, keep planting all those leafy greens, carrots, turnips.
Have any plants that you would say just don't waste your time with?
The question is, are there plants that we should not waste our time with here in the Wood River Valley? I might get in trouble saying what I want to say.
I know some people who live in Ketchum who are growing all of the impossible warm season vegetables because they create warm microclimates. They have hotbeds, they have mini greenhouses, they have walls and stones, and
Okay, that's the exception.
that's the exception. But if you want to create miracles, you can, because some people do. I would say don't try to grow maybe Brussels sprouts, because the aphids will eat them before you do.
And they're really heavy feeders. They need a lot of nutrients to grow any, and they take a long time. Like, you have to plant them in April, and you might harvest 5 in November. I don't grow many peppers, especially the bell peppers, because they take a long time to produce and to ripen. I like the lunchbox peppers. I like jalapeno peppers, some of the smaller chili peppers, but I will never spend any time growing bell peppers anymore. Same thing with melons. Like, this is me personally. Melons take up a lot of space. I've harvested probably less than 10 melons in my 7 years of gardening in the area, and they're always like this small. So I support a lot of our local farmers, and I shop at the farmers market. And if I can get local produce grown incredibly well by people who can do it and it's affordable for me, I tend to not grow as many of those crops. So, like, I love peppers. I freeze a ton of peppers to eat all winter long. I would never try to grow them in my own garden unless I at some point have a really big greenhouse where I can keep them really, really warm. It just doesn't produce enough for it to make sense for me to grow. But it's always fun to try new things. You know, I don't think there's, like, don't plant bananas, don't plant avocados. You probably won't get very much with citrus. Some people do indoor citrus trees that they bring out, which is fine.
I would say go progressively, grow what you like to eat, and experiment. It's okay to have some of your plants fail. Experiment, and some years they will work and some years they won't. But for me, it's just a passion, and it's just so much pleasure to try and experiment and learn from it.
What's the secret for Halloween pumpkins? I've seen some people that have beautiful neighbor in Northridge that her front yard is all pumpkins in the fall. But
You need full sun all day long.
The question is, what's the secret to Halloween pumpkins?
To grow large pumpkins. You need full sun all day long. You need a lot of sun to grow pumpkins.
The second secret is we have full sun, but we can never get more than like a little yellow, like under rain.
And you need a rich soil also, and you need a warm soil.
So this is very, very basic, and you can tune into our previous recordings about soil health in general, but you tend to think about nitrogen creates leaves and phosphorus creates fruit. So if you're struggling with getting a lot of fruit, think about ways to add more phosphorus into your soil. You might also have issues with pollination. It happens more often with tomatoes, but it can happen with squashes and cucumbers too, is blossom end rot. A lot of people say that's a calcium deficiency. It's very unlikely that your soil is actually low in calcium. You're lacking the microbes to transport the calcium to make them available for the plant. So that's where composting is going to be your friend.
And more compost. And
more compost and adding things like, I don't want to get too in depth in this, but so microbes feed off of sugar in the soil. So roots release sugar, and that's how the exchange works. If you want to quicken things up, you can give sugar to your soil, whether it's honey or molasses, or like Manon and I both
compost tea.
Compost tea.
Don't go spread molasses.
Right, yeah, everything diluted.
Diluted in your compost tea.
Some people use milk. Like every time I rinse out a milk jug at home, I actually take that water and feed it to a house plant. And you could do that in a garden. Like you could buy a gallon of milk and mix it with 10 gallons of water and apply it to your soil. And all of that feeds the microbes. And as more and more microbes get activated and living, more nutrients are being sent out. Other things that to boost soil health, like don't till your yard. Don't leave bare soil, because all of those things reduce the microbiome that's there. It compacts the soil. It makes it harder for all the living organisms to move around and make a home there. So the better we can treat our soil, the healthier our soil, the healthier all of our plants will be.
And we can talk about your specific microclimate. But yeah, experiment, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Yeah. And this valley has amazing different climates where some people will grow beautiful peaches, oh, my goodness, and others can't at all. So
and
there's quite a variety of microclimates.
Also think about the variety of pumpkins you're trying to grow. So it might be something that takes longer than what you're having time to do. Or maybe it likes it warmer. Maybe it likes it cooler than what you're doing. So think about some of those things too, and make sure whatever pumpkin variety you've purchased, if you're buying seeds or starts, can
or get
go
pumpkin
to
seeds
maturity.
From the Wood River Seed Library because they were grown here.
Yeah, question? The question is, how do you deal with ground squirrels and voles in your garden?
You can discourage them with things that smell offensive to them, like cinnamon or peppers, hot peppers.
They don't like daffodils. So with fruit trees, some people will do a ring of daffodil bulbs around, like very close, and that can deter them. My biggest recommendation is think about your overall ecosystem. Do you have owl boxes or owls living locally? Do you have hawks? Bringing in some of those predator species. Someone said cats, that can work. Jack Russell Terriers, some of those small dogs, they're actually trained as hunting dogs. Like that's their lineage. I've seen them do incredible work on reducing vole populations on ranches. So you can try things like that, but really think about the overall habitat. There's also snakes that eat voles. So there's no quick and easy solution to immediately address it. Some people, like if you have a raised bed, you can dig down like 2 feet and create a barrier, or put like hardware cloth down to keep them from coming up. But all of that is labor intensive and financially intensive. So I think about the habitat is like the biggest thing.
Cats do it around my place. My neighbor's cat, I don't even have cats. The neighbors have cats, and they're master of my garden.
Makes me sad because they also kill the songbirds, but like you just gotta somehow train them to only go for the voles, right? Yeah. Other question? So the question is that the person installed garden beds and did what they thought was everything correctly with layering cardboard and mulch and compost. They're still having issues with crabgrass coming up. And what is the trick to that?
There must have been seeds in the compost or seed blown. There's a field across my place, and it blows the seeds on my garden.
I replace the soil to get rid of that problem. Can I just mitigate it by just keep
the question is do I have to get rid of my soil to eliminate potential crabgrass seeds, or can I mitigate the problem by pulling it up and pulling it up? I would actually say think about smothering it out. So what can you Well, you could do that. You can do plant smothering too, like things that grow pretty prolifically. Like you could try a clover. You could try overwintering oats and field peas as a cover crop to reduce the amount of sunlight and nutrients available for that. You can also think about some type of like fungal. A lot of grasses are not fungal dominant. They're bacterial dominant, which is getting back into that soil conversation. Can you inoculate with some things that really put off a lot of fungal activity to reduce the prevalence of the crabgrass? Could be another way to do it. Yeah, I mean, a lot like compost that's primarily made with kitchen scraps is going to have less. I would say worm casting is a little bit better. Wood chip based compost is going to be more fungal dominant, a little bit harder.
Another thing is to cover your area with black plastic.
Yeah,
And
solarize.
leave the plastic there all summer and only plant, you make a little hole, you plant your plants in the hole so deprived of the light, the grass won't grow.
Yeah. So that technique is called solarization, and that can work to clear off any type of grasses or weeds that you want to eliminate. Only thing it doesn't work with is bindweed, just to let everyone know. The bindweed will find its way to the edge of the black plastic and grow from there. Yeah. Any other questions? I think we just have 2 more slides. The next slide is another herb chart about herbs and flowers. Most of these I would say are edible flowers. Some herbs, a lot of our herbs are cooler season herbs, like we talked about cilantro last time and chives and things like that. I am a big edible flower fan. I think they're delicious and they're so pretty and they're so easy to grow. They're great companion plants.
And they're great for pollination.
They're great for pollination. They look pretty. The same plants that you like, calendula and marigolds are still beautiful in a cut flower bouquet. You can make all sorts of flower crowns with them. I love nasturtiums. That's probably one of my favorite edible flowers. It's really peppery. If you haven't had it before, it's like hot, and the leaves are edible too, which I think is really fun. And that's kind of more of a ground cover, kind of grows out. I love planting it with tomatoes. It's just really colorful and vibrant. Chamomile. I grow a lot of chamomile and harvest it for teas. It does reseed itself, but it's a happy reseeder. I like that to reseed.
Some of the herbs reseed themselves and become invasive. So what I do is I grow them in pots. You're allowed to grow in the pot, not around the pot.
Where I let my herbs grow, because I'd rather have them than grasses and bindweed. So I have this bed. I bought a home that had a lot of ornamental landscaping. It's beautiful, but a lot of it's not edible. So I'm working on transforming it into an edible landscape, and I have all these buttercups, which are relatively pretty. They're also relatively invasive. So I'm going to plant a ton of mint in there to hopefully get the buttercups to reduce without having to use any herbicides or doing a ton of tillage to kill them all off. I'm going to try to get the mint to take over in that space. And I like a lot of mint, so I'm okay with that. So it's really about what your needs are, what your goals are when you start to think about, do I pot herbs or do I let them take over in a certain spot?
And all the herbs produce flowers that are very precious for the very small beneficial insects.
Lemon balm, I think, is a good example of this. So I planted lemon balm 4 years in a row at my old house, which was in Haley in a kind of shady spot close to Carbonate. So I didn't have a lot of great sun. Could never get my lemon balm to come back. Sarah Berman, Squash Blossom Farm, good friend of mine, she has abundant lemon balm literally growing everywhere because she's in a sunny, warmier spot. So that's where our microclimates really come into play. And I'm like, well, I want lemon balm like that because I love lemon balm too, and I could not get it to grow
I don't
all.
love it so much, but it's growing everywhere. And people come and say, you want lemon balm? Take it, uproot it. And next year it's growing again. So I can't get rid of it.
I have had last year lemon balm in a planter, but it only got so tall and it never flowered or.
It's a mystery to me. I can't tell you why some people can't grow lemon balm and I can't say I have an overabundance of them, but I have 2 or 3 spots where they keep growing and I can't pull them out. They just come back. And
Move
I
your
don't water
pot
them.
to a different spot. See if a different spot does better. Or plant it in the ground and see. Because if it's not doing that well in the pot, it might not take over in the ground.
Come to my place, get my plant to your place, and it'll probably work.
Any other questions about plants, herbs, things that aren't on the chart? Obviously on the chart there's no perennials on the chart because they're mostly cool season. We would consider them cool season. Like Manon was saying in the beginning, a lot of these warm season crops are tropical. Tomatoes are perennial in the right climate, right? A lot of the peppers can be perennials in the correct climate. A lot of these plants like nasturtiums definitely perennials in the right climate. We are not that climate, so we consider them short season, warm season crops.
Annuals.
Yeah, annuals, exactly. And then...
Except the lemon ball in my garden.
Not in mine. We'll see. Maybe this year. Maybe this will be my lucky year. So we, Manon and I have done a lot of webinars together. So you can find a lot of those webinars either on the Haley Public Library site or on 5bresiliencegarden.com. We also have a Facebook group where community members that are gardeners talk about things, say, I've got lots of lemon balm, who wants to come get it? Or they'll say, I really want some lemon balm, who wants to give me some? Or they have a compost bin available for someone, or they have a question about some issue that they're dealing with pumpkins, and it's a good way to engage with our community. We also, obviously, we've talked about the seeds. The seeds are amazing. I am a seed saver. I give seeds to the library. I sort seeds for the library. Manon runs it all. It's an amazing resource. And it's at the Haley Public Library, the Wood River YMCA, Building Material Thrift Store, and Itty Bitty Farms in Cary. So there's a few locations throughout, and you can always reach out to Manon directly if you're looking for a seed that you can't find in the library. She might just have it somewhere in her home.
Yes, everywhere, on my table, under my bed, at the Grange, everywhere, seeds.
How long do seeds last?
A long time. A long time. The industry has standards for how long a seed lasts, but that's because they have to prove that their seeds will grow, like 95% of the seeds will grow for a given year. And they want to sell more seeds, right? But seeds, if they're kept in the proper environment, at a stable temperature, in the dark, in a dry place, if it's colder, it's best. But I have mine at room temperature. I have seeds that are 15 years old. They still sprout. They don't know that they're not supposed to sprout. They still sprout. They may sprout 60% instead of 90%, but they, I still get. I never throw away a seed. Oftentimes, if I think they're not good, I'll throw them on the ground and, oh my gosh, they grew.
Yes.
And too many of them grew.
Seeds are resilient. Nature is resilient. We are resilient as people, even if the industries don't want us to think so. So if you're doubting, just plant it.
If you need to throw away seeds, give them to the Wood River Seed Library instead. Someone else will use them.
And then just a couple things. So Manon mentioned our upcoming seed and plant exchange at the Grange. That'll be Saturday, May 28th. It's an amazing time to get seeds and plant starts and meet your gardening community. This is the last of our series, but all of our other recordings from the Haley Public Library are available. Our first one was on seeds and soil. We went into depth about those topics. Our last one in April was all about cool season gardening. So if you want to get stuck planting right now, that would be a great resource for you. And then again, plugging Squash Blossoms Farm, their plant sale. So if you don't want to start things from seed, but you want really reliables, you can get some from Squash Blossom.
And they usually sell out quite quickly.
They do, and they're really amazing plants. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. To the seed exchange, you can bring them directly to the library here. There's a little cabinet with seeds. I'm trying to train people to put their seeds directly in there so they don't have to come through my hands or be stored under my table for a month.
Yeah.
You can put your seed packets, whether they're commercial or a packet that you make. I have actually blank seed packets there that you can use to repackaged seeds.
Just label them, at least with what they are. Variety is great, but if it's just pumpkin, just at least write pumpkin on there. Something, so people do know what kind of seeds they are. Okay, any other questions? We're happy to chat.
Yeah,
we could talk about gardening all day, so we will stick around and talk as much as you all want us to. Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. A couple of things. I just wanted to mention, some of you may remember Carol Blackburn. She was a longtime gardener in our area. And her daughter got some of her basil seeds from 1997 because Carol had a scientific mind, so she wrote down all sorts of information. And Anne said that she got excellent germination from those 1997 basil seeds. So you just never know. Give it a try. And like these guys were saying, just go to the Haley Public Library website, go to library programs. There's a drop down. It says library archives, and it goes back 2 years. These guys have done 6 programs, maybe even more. Quite a few programs. So anyway,
I lost track.
I've lost track. Anyway, so
before that, I have a YouTube channel also with programs on them. And YouTube has all kinds of things also.
Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for coming out tonight, and good luck with your garden.